podcasts. Okay, so we just talked about all those things, that those territories were lost, right? And it's important right now to have a bird view picture, a general picture, that eastern territories of the Byzantine, they were culturally, linguistically, ethnically closer to Muslims. That's why when we'll be talking today about another general emperor, Leo the Sword. Leo is Saurian, Leo the Syrian. Leo the Syrian, one who introduced iconoclasm. He was from the east, and a sign of the time. He was not just bicultural, but he also was bilingual. He was a fluent Arabic speaker. So, and those territories that went under the Arabs, under the Caliphate, they felt people who didn't accept the Council of Chalcedon, right? And those who were already before not in communion with the church, with the official church, like Nestorians, they were much more at home under the Arabs, especially that often their theology would be much more friendly to Islam, in a sense that for Islamic people, the Lord Jesus, he is a prophet. He's a great prophet, but he's a prophet because for them, the last revelation, the last prophet, it's like for us Christ. It's for them, it's Muhammad. So that's their last prophet. And in this sense, if you are an historian, and if for you the Holy Mother of God is not Theotokos but Christotokos, you can find common ground, right? Besides that, they were taxed less, and they were left alone. Nobody now worked on bringing them in the fold of the official church. So Thessaloniki, another great city of the empire, dealt with Slavic invaders, right? The same was in Italy. So in 750, Ravenna finally was taken over by the Lombards, by the North Germans, and Sicily and south of Italy remained for a long time until the 11th century. Remained in the Byzantine Empire. So when Heraclius died in 641, so his son from his first wife, and Evgraph mentioned about problems with his marriages, he reigned for a few months. Okay, just secondly to admit somebody. Right. So his second wife, Martina, she reigned with Heraclonas, but to see that it very much was still the Roman Empire, Senate could have been quite determined regarding a weak ruler. So she was a woman, and Heraclonas was a kid. So they were overturned by Valentis, Armenian general, and they were mutilated. Another things about Byzantium, that they somehow considered mutilation to be a Christian act. So when we read Byzantine laws, we might be shocked about the amount of cutting limbs and various defacing stuff. But at this time, the 7th century, sort of mutilation was preferred to capital punishment. So in this sense, they believe it would be a merciful thing to slit somebody's nose, and so even like gouging eyes, so then taking this person's life. Okay, and that's something that Russians didn't really have. So if you compare Russian local laws, even before Christianity or shortly after Christianity, you don't find, so Russians would do taxes, they would do, well, basically they would fine heavily for various crimes. So, and this time is time of monophilitism, another imperial attempt to reconcile non-Chalcedonians with Orthodoxy. So it's time of St. Maximus the Confessor, right? Constans II, a grandson of Heraclius. We are still dealing with Heracles dynasty here. He was martyred in Syracuse, right, in Italy, because he was hated since I believe he went to get taxes there, or somehow he extracted wealth from there. So, and the Byzantines remained superior in the naval forces, right? But with help of the carpenters, Byzantine carpenters, and probably also navy who were found in the Arab-controlled territories, they very quickly started to be shipbuilders. Okay, so also now no great power can get away without a civil war. So we are dealing with a great schism of Islam that exists until nowadays, division of Islam into Shiites and Sunni Islam. Okay, so the capital of the newly founded Umayyad Caliphate was in Damascus. And that meant that it was quite close to the Byzantine border. And that meant that constant concern of the Byzantines. So what kind of impresses me about the Eastern Romans, that they didn't really, as far as I can see from their attitude, from the facts, right, they didn't really take their today for granted. They kind of, we always expect that things were going to be better, and they, in a sense, maybe were kind of, I don't want to say cynical, but sort of practical, or maybe yes, cynical in a sense. They knew that there are going to be a new enemy, a new foe. They kind of realize there is not going to be perpetual peace. There is not, and Arabs actually, as their neighbors, they prove it, because with their notion of jihad, notion of carrying on the truth, they believe in impossibility of having truth having peace with infidels. So with this in mind, they could only have truth with non-Muslims. So all they can have is more or less prolonged time of truce. And also they kept reminded the Romans every year they basically would cross and raid territories. Okay. So now Constantine the Fourth, the Birded One, Pogonatus, and here we are dealing with the first great Arab siege of Constantinople from the sea. And also this was the first of the 4 Arabic attempts to achieve what finally achieved Mehmed II. But just think about it, it's almost 800 years. So the Byzantium still survived for 800 years. But I mentioned that the naval power kind of was matched in the Mediterranean, to the point that later in the same century, Cyprus was divided, was under dual Roman Arab administrations. People were taxed both for Constantinople and for Caliphate, right? So Arabs were able to take over of Cyprus, and Cyprus was under dual administration, but still Byzantine strategies and Greek fire that also that came in very handy in this time, right? I don't know. So do every one of you know about Greek fire? If yes, then I will just keep it, right? Do I have to speak about Greek fire? Yeah. Yes, no?
Well, I mean, we read about it in the reading, but don't know much more about it.
Right. Okay, fine. I will show you short things therefore regarding Greek fire. Okay.
This life-saving device stops a person from choking in seconds. Do you know?
Choking emergency.
677 AD, war over Constantinople. To the Byzantine capital. Ships blocked the city walls, cutting off all supplies. A brilliant inventor named Callinicos offers help. He presents Constantine IV with a new weapon, a mysterious substance that, when ignited, burns bright and hot. Greek fire. The Byzantines want to burn down the attacker's fleet, but they face another problem. How did they manage to get the flames to the enemy ships? The solution is a primitive pump known as a siphon, which normally would expel a jet of water. Only instead of spitting water, it spits fire. On the backside, it has a container for the flammable liquid. With a double-cylinder pump, the liquid moves through a pipe or hose up to the nozzle. With the help of a firebowl, the liquid is then ignited. How dangerous is a replica Byzantine flamethrower? Could this invention really have forced the Arab fleet to give up? According to ancient reports, up to 3 Greek fire hoses were installed on the Byzantine warships. In this experiment, simulating an attack on a wooden warship, will Stephen's mixture burn long enough to ignite the ship's wall from roughly 32 feet away? In no time, the wooden wall is ablaze. The burning liquid sticks to the wood. All the crew could do was watch helplessly.
That must be it. Okay. So, but you still, if you have sand, if you still can use sand, but they use sort of natural petroleum component that was able to to keep flame on the water, and this was quite amazing. They also used like pottery, right, as sort of as grenade type to throw them, right. And this was a state secret of one of state secrets of Byzantium, right? I think it's later on it became more widespread, and so Arabs also started to use it. But what I also meant to say, I said strategy, but in fact I meant to say that Feodosian's walls, they did very good job of keeping the Arabs away. Okay, now also, as I said, it never was quiet. Bulgarians started to have their state, and Bulgarians, they are interesting people. Who is not interesting? Of course, it's stupid maybe to say like that. It's very unspecified qualifier, interesting. But what I'm saying that those Slavic settlers that surrounded Thessaloniki, right? They were mostly agricultural, non-aggressive types of kind of like almost like economic, how to say, immigrants. But they started to be controlled by Turkic nomads who had very good structure, and they came from Volga River. So now, you know, there are Tartars in Russia, right? And Tartars in Russia, they speak also Turkic language, of the same language as people in Turkey speak. Not the same, but they common root language. And they are descendants of those Bulgars who didn't move to Bulgaria, right? So, or Macedonia. And as a result, those Turkic invaders, they mixed with Slavic settlers, and Bulgarians came out of this. At this time, it was still a pagan state, but later on, interestingly, masters, they adopted a religion and language of their subjects, of Slavic subjects. So nowadays, therefore, Bulgarians, they are a mixture of, so kind of they have Turkish roots, Turkic roots, and Slavic roots. Okay. So,
Father Andrei,
yes.
forgive me, my Wi-Fi keeps cutting in and out, and it keeps kicking me out and in. Forgive me if I keep joining back. It's just
Understand.
sorry.
Understand. So, and was part of the old Roman strategy, divide and conquer. And in this sense, you always need to have some kind of friend who, when you need him, he would hit your enemy in the back. That's kind of one of the big things in the Byzantine strategy. You always need to have this friend who would be able to rescue you when you really need it. And that's what's very important. So in the 15th century, Byzantium didn't have any friends like that. They were not available, simply, not just because, I mean, no. That's one of the reasons that everything, all strategies, everything else, they basically ran dry. They ran out of all their tricks, kind of. And Khazars, another Turkish state, right, was capable of hitting Caliphate from their back, come from rear. So when Arabs would move to Constantinople, so Khazars would hit Arabs from the back. And that's how it is, right? Let me just show you more. Yeah, you see, basically, this is Khazars Khaganate, right? And they were able to come to they were able to come to the Caliphate here. Okay, so, and
I have a question.
You see also that Byzantine at this time consisted of what is nowadays Turkey, right, and Greece, Balkans, and still chunks of Italy. Okay. So 681 was the last ecumenical council that dealt with Christological issues. To some extent, ensued iconoclasm could be seen also with extension as a continuation about Christology, but it's really with extension. Even St. Fyodor of Studios, or when he was approached by his disciple, another abbot later, monk Navkratios, and St. Fyodor was asked by Navkratios, why do we call iconoclasts heretics? Because if you would compare them with whatever was before, those things were purely Christological. Now it's about icons. And St. Fyodor responded that we call them by extension. So you kind of see difference here, sort of icons and Christology, so different weight classes. But nevertheless, it still also can be extended to conversation about Christ, about the Lord, because iconoclasts, they strongly believe that the only proper depiction, only proper representation of the Lord would be Holy Eucharist. Because since if you focus on his humanity, then you undermine his divinity. Sort of that was their line of argument. Plus, they were influenced by very strictly Unitarian views of their Eastern neighbors, who didn't tolerate any depictions. So it's kind of, and they were influenced by this culture, by Islamic culture. So, but now the end of the 7th century, meet Justinian II, right? Justinian II was called Renoutmitos, right? Because he didn't have his nose. And he was the last emperor of Heracles Dynasty, a son of Constantine the Fourth. And I call him the master of the word, in a sense that he really, it was his word. If he promised something, he couldn't take it back. So he was a quite brutal type. So here he is with the golden patch instead of his, because he only got his opening, his nostrils, right? Since his nose was cut in order to prevent him from coming back as an emperor, because sort of the Byzantines believed similarly to, it's not that what canon law believes. According to canon law, you can still be ordained if it doesn't prevent you from performing your duties. But the Byzantines believe that an emperor should have his physical integrity, all right? So this reconstruction, of course, of his, and he assembled in 691 the council in Trula. This is a palace in Constantinople, and this council is known as the 5th and 6th council, because the 5th and 6th councils, they predominantly dealt with theological issues, and this council produced 102 canons. And it's an interesting council because basically it perceives the Byzantine Christianity as a standard Christianity. So if Armenians do different, if the Westerners do different, then it's deviation. So it's kind of interesting perception. So the whatever is done, and I mean regarding, for instance, like celibacy of bishops, right? And also like some practices of Armenians are mentioned there as well. And it was also interesting because this council was quite systematic in addressing various different customs, kind of trying to bring down conformity, uniformity that everyone would do as the Byzantines. And then also it prohibited some kind of images, like it prohibited Christ to be depicted as a lamb. And so it's, to some extent, this council gave some point of reference to iconoclasts, because I mean, it didn't really spell out any iconoclastic, but you can develop in their direction. And this whole, and as all other heresies, they all have some point in scripture and somewhere that they start to elaborate, and then the church will respond back and say, listen, you know, that's not how we understand it. So it's not like they just come out, you know, from the sky with something outlandish, but they have point of reference, and then they start discussing, start develop, perhaps also applying to some tradition that was not really clarified, because there were fathers who were quite strict about icons. So
Father,
I would refer to them. Yes.
don't the Catholics depict Christ as a lamb?
Because Catholics, they don't record, they had hard time with recognizing this council, the fifth and
So do they
sixth.
still not recognize it as?
I think it's partially recognized by the West. It was partially recognized, but quite late. So it wasn't recognized right away. They definitely don't recognize it because in the Orthodox churches, with many other things, it's peculiar. It's kind of enjoys the status of the ecumenical council and both local council. It's council in Trula, which is a local, but then how about the fifth and sixth ecumenical council? So figure it out. So Justinian, he not very wisely breached this truce with Arabs, right? And Arabs pushed back. It was a disaster. Senate was very unhappy with this. So Justinian's nose was slit, and he was sent, or either he flew himself to Crimea. But in Crimea, he made himself friends with Khazars. So, and Khazars Khan married his sister to him, and she received the name Feodora, right? And therefore she became the first non-Roman emperors when Justinian came back to Constantinople for his second tenure, after which they already decided to bet we don't want to come him for the third time, and we will take his head off instead of just taking his nose. So, and now we are dealing, as a response to all those new challenges, we are dealing with new administrative and military arrangement, which is received the name Femata, plural, or Fema. So this is something that used to be in Carthage or Ravenna, where there was an exarch who was also a military commander, and now they promote the same arrangement for the whole empire. So the whole empire now is divided into fems, into femata. And on one hand, it's very handy because this arrangement allows military governor to mobilize peasants very quickly. But on the other hand, it's a time bomb, right? Why do I call this a time bomb? Yes, Elijah, please.
Part of the reason why it's a time bomb is that when the empire was divided into themata, what ends up happening is that, yes, it did allow for more military use, but it gave generals the resources they needed to wage civil wars against the empire and overall weakened the central authority of the emperor. Yes,
thank you. And we see, because now Byzantium is the regional power, you are not having cases like with Diocletian, who was proclaimed an emperor in Nicomedia. So if you want this job, if you want to be an emperor, you need to bring your army from your Fema to Constantinople. It's not going to fly. You're not going to be proclaimed an emperor in your local town. So, and Constantinople now, after Alexandria lost and Damascus and Antioch, became the major city without having old, venerable competitors. So now those territories that Justinian regained, somehow they, I think, did serve the empire because they gave sort of more insulation, and like Carthage was taken only at the end of the 7th century, right? So in the meantime, Justinian II, he received an army from this Khan Trevel, right? I mean, the inhabitants of Constantinople were terrified when he showed up at the walls because he terrorized wealthy people and aristocrats there. But since he knew Constantinople as the back of his palm, he found his way into the city, and some reports mention that he found his way through septic through basically septic tanks, right? Not tanks, but sort of tubes or whatever the word. So, and once he came back, so he terrorized people again. So he wasn't a successful emperor, wasn't a rock figure, right, as I keep calling them. And at the end, he was dethroned by Philippicus, an Armenian military commander from Chersonesus, and that's where actually Justinian was sent. That's where he was in exile. So, and his son Tiberius was trying to find refuge in a holy place where he's not supposed to be taken, but as with humans, there are always all kind of how to say barbarities and brutalities, and so he was dragged out of the church and butchered outside of the church. So the end of Heracles dynasty. Okay, and this is to give you idea of Chersonesus, where where Justinian was in exile. This is Black Sea, right? And it's now near modern day Sebastopol. So this is Crimea, this is Crimean Peninsula, from where Russian Christianity spread. That's where that's the place of the Byzantine territory where Prince Vladimir was baptized. Okay, so and we are still like 100 years away, 150 years away until the first records about Russians started to show up, historical records. So, and then Philippicus, this Bardan Philippicus, this Armenian general, he didn't prove himself successful. So, and now those checks and balances, those kind of parties, right, those clubs, they also controlled situation in the city. So he was blinded by the blues when he was actually supposed to be drunk, right? When a similar thing happened to Emperor Zeno. Emperor Zeno was terribly drunk, and they put him in a coffin, and he sobered up, and he wanted to get out of the coffin, but his wife didn't permit those who whatever kept guard at this coffin. So he died from suffocation, Emperor Zeno. So a similar thing happened to Philippicus, that he was frostly blind, and then his head was cut off. And now there is a number of mediocre rulers, right, until a rock figure shows up. And this rock figure was Leo the Sword, the Isaurian, right, the first iconoclast emperor. And it's similar as with Diocletian, right? Diocletian persecuted Christians, but he was a great reformer. And here we see another attempt. So Leo from the east, right, who was, while he was bicultural, he nevertheless fought against Arabs, right? Sort of. It was interesting. He fought against Arabs, and he was very successful. And the Yevgraph, when he was talking about Heraclius, he mentioned sort of understanding of people, right? For people where they lived in God-governed reality. They try to understand, what does God say to us through this or that act. So that's really was for them something very topical. So Leo, with his reforms, and again, we don't really have his journals, or we don't have any, how to say, his Facebook group or page where he would like from day in, day out, write about what was going on, his thought process, explaining, you know, I have this consideration, that consideration. We really don't have anything like that. Okay, so it's very hard to reconstruct. So there are various speculations about this. And of course, we know a lot from Theophanes, a monk who was himself an Orthodox, a confessor, and then his successor, who was called Theophanes Continuatis, because we don't know his name. All we know is that he carried on the chronicle that Theophanes started. So, and they of course give idea from our point of view, from Orthodox point of view. But one account would say that Jews, they influenced Leo and so on. But be this as it may, he right away had to deal with a very massive Arab army showing up at Constantinople. So, and now he had this friend who would agree to hit your foe in the back, and they were Bulgarians, and we are right now in your break time, right? So, okay, so we'll resume at 10, okay? Okay, everyone is back. So the Saurian dynasty, and North Africa was lost, and North Africa received the name as it is known until nowadays, which is Maghreb, right? So this is Arabic name for countries of Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, right, and Chad, I think also Maghreb. Okay, now Arabic civilization proved to be very competitive and very deep. For instance, the oldest university is the one that exists until nowadays in the Moroccan city of Fez, was founded by the lady Fatima al-Fihri, and Arabs were able to up the game in mathematics, coming up with the notion of zero, okay? And even in the Russian, when we say цифры, it is based on Arabic cipher, right? So Arab mathematics, and also Arabs started to translate classical knowledge in their language, and therefore many classical writings they preserved because they were available in Arabic translations. Their original their Greek originals were lost. They only survived in Arabic translation.
Father?
Yes.
Nico and Paul are trying to get on, but their internet isn't working.
So
they just wanted me to tell you that.
Okay. Right. So Alhambra in Cordoba remains a very beautiful example of Arabic architecture and Arabic legacy, in a sense, cultural legacy. Right. Let's see.
The story of the Islamic Moors. In the year 711, these North African Muslims crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and quickly conquered the entire Iberian Peninsula.
We can't see the.
Of course, they were able to cross into Iberian Peninsula because of the Byzantine territories.
Ocho, we're still looking at your lecture.
Yeah, we can't see the video.
Okay.
Sure.
Fine.
Most of its inhabitants. Throughout the Middle Ages, for over 700 years, Spain was a predominantly Muslim society living under Muslim rule. And that age shapes today's sightseeing agenda. Granada's dominant site is the Alhambra, the last and greatest Moorish palace. Nowhere else does the splendor of that civilization, Al-Andalus, shine so brightly. For 2 centuries, until 1492, Granada reigned as the capital of a dwindling Moorish empire. As Christian forces pushed the Moors further and further south, this palace was the last hurrah of a sophisticated civilization. While the rest of Europe slumbered through much of the Middle Ages, the Moorish civilization was wide awake. The math necessary to construct this palace would have dazzled Europeans of that age. The Moors made great gains in engineering, medicine, even classical Greek studies. In fact, some of the great thinking of ancient Greece had been forgotten by Europe, but was absorbed into Islam and actually given back to Europe via scholars here in Spain. The culture of the Moors was exquisite, artfully combining both design and aesthetics. Facing a reflecting pond, the Hall of the Ambassadors was the throne room. It was here that the Sultan, seated Oz-like, received foreign emissaries. Its wooden ceiling illustrates a command of geometry. With 8,000 pieces inlaid like a giant jigsaw puzzle, it symbolizes the complexity of Allah's infinite universe. Arabic calligraphy, mostly poems and verses of praise from the Quran, is everywhere. Muslims avoid making images of living creatures. That's God's work. But decorating with religious messages is fine. One phrase, "Only God is victorious," is repeated 9,000 times throughout the Alhambra. Like the Sultan, we can escape from the palace into what was the most perfect Arabian garden in Andalusia. This royal...
Okay, so I think that takes care of this. Right, so it also gives you idea, point of reference for iconoclasts, right, in the Muslim art, right? There is a Muslim cultural influence from the Muslim cultural influence. Okay, so the empire continue to pushing back, to trying to expand breathing space, right? And interestingly, there are records of huge demographic growth in the first half of the 8th century. Okay, so that also was a very good thing for prolonging the Byzantine life. Okay. So this is the Byzantine in the time of the Isaurians, the Isaurian dynasty, Assyrian dynasty. Some of the Byzantines, I think it's a little bit overrated, but they consider that Constantinople was the one who contained the Islamic invasion, Islamic how you called it, expansion, right, into Europe. I think the French were the ones actually. But I just would like to mention that there are those Byzantines who really believe that all those sieges of Constantinople. They drained forces from Arabic invasion farther into Europe. Okay, I'm not quite agree with this. Okay. So Leo kind of was similar to Justinian in the sense that he had addressed problems, and or maybe like Heraclius would be a better match, because he inherited the empire in a very bad shape, and also he had to address problems on all fronts, like in Sicily. Okay, so a sensible explanation of iconoclasm that the Romans tried to figure out what the formula, what combination would make God to be pleased with us. And kind of they believe that by prohibiting veneration to what they call idols, to icons, we are getting God's blessing. And look, you know, we are winning. We are. It's kind of like saying, you know, America is prosperous because we are pleasing to God. So that's how some people would say. This sort of, that's what resembles me, this line of arguing. So, and Leo the Sword gave a very strong inspiration for a number of generations following him, because iconoclasm lasted for at least 2-3 generations there. And people who would grow up, they already grew up with understanding of, they would take it for granted. That's how we believe. And they kind of didn't have a lot of food to think otherwise, food for their thoughts, because kind of, look, we are winning, you know, what else should we wish? But at the same time, the Byzantine Imperial Church found itself isolated from the rest of Christendom. Pope of Rome was adamantly against iconoclasm. St. John of Damascus, whom iconoclasts called Al-Mansur, because he was an employee of Caliph in Damascus, right? He was the one who spelled out Orthodox understanding of icons, right? The ones that we understand explaining the difference between worship and veneration. And worship, which is latria, like idolatry, that's what in English, right? Latria, it's reserved only for God. But veneration, dulia, that's why icon venerators, iconaduls, that's even used in the Byzantine literature as an English, adopted English words, or iconophiles, they are respected. That's why I mentioned earlier that it's still somehow Christological, because you demonstrate love for Christ. But you do need to understand limits, because there, of course, were abuses of icon veneration, when most venerable icons were even designated as patrons, as sponsors at baptism. There were some cases where paint was scratched and added to chalice with wine and bread for consecration into body and blood, and so on. But of course, those were most extraordinary cases. But iconoclasts would happily point out to them. So, and as a result, we venerate icons as representation of those who are our teachers, those whom we love, and we address to them with our prayers through the icons. But icons still objects, right? That's important. That's important distinction. So Leo Isarian married his son Constantine to a Khazar princess, making alliance with Khazars even more stronger, right? New smart taxation that was based on not on household numbers, but on the size of the land. And amazingly, the Byzantines were able to collect taxes probably until the very end. And that's something that I don't know, shall I say no one, but it wasn't known in Europe, because in Europe they could not collect taxes that efficiently. And that is very strong Roman legacy, because they built and continued on the Roman foundation, the one that was laid down by Diocletian. Okay, now something I would like to show you to prove my point, right? So I mean, it's not world history and civilization that we do with Father John, but nevertheless, I think for the contents, we also would like us to look at the Battle of Poitiers. Okay, so it's 732. Leo Isarian is in the east. So
good grand.
Ocho, we're still looking at lecture 7.
what
Connections.
about, what do you see now?
Emails that get
No?
the job
I don't
done.
see the video.
Okay,
Think about
fine.
more than just grammar and
This sentence is grammatically correct.
Flashpoint History presents the Battle of Poitiers. With the rise of Islam, the Arabic expansion explodes across the world map. The armies of the Caliphate rapidly capture Arabia, the Levant, and Syria. The Persian Empire falls, and the Byzantine are forced back. The stage is now set for the conquest of North Africa, which begins with a stunning victory at Heliopolis. The Byzantine are driven from Egypt, and Alexandria is soon taken. Over the next 60 years, the Arabian armies push west across the Maghreb. They managed to capture ancient Carthage in the year 698. As the westward move continues, the indigenous Berbers are incorporated into the army. These men swell the ranks and allow for Tangiers to be humbled in 708. With the capture of this city, nearly all of North Africa is now part of the Caliphate. Looking north across a small expanse of water, a Muslim army now heavy with Berber troops crosses into Spain in the year 711. These men are expertly led by Tariq ibn Ziyad, a veteran commander who is reinforced to a fighting strength of over 12,000 men. He is immediately detected by the Visigoth king Roderick. Roderick is an impulsive commander, and while he fields a larger force, the loyalty of his men is questionable. At the Battle of Guadalete, he rushes in, but as his forces smash in, he is abandoned by his nobles. Tariq and his veterans crush Roderick's flanks. The Visigoth army is quickly annihilated. With little opposition, Tariq moves on to quickly capture Toledo and then Cordoba. He is joined by his senior commander Musa ibn Nusayr, who brings in another 18,000 troops. These two men make the conquest of Spain a lightning affair and even begin the conquest of France. With the exception of a few Christian kingdoms in the north, Al-Andalus, or the name that the Arabs have now given to their new territory in Spain, is nearly all but subjugated. Now raids begin across the Pyrenees into France. One in the year 721 meets a disastrous end at the Battle of Toulouse. Another in 725 makes it across France and to the city of Autun. But then, the campaign of 732 begins. A large army is assembled and placed under the command of Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi. It has nearly 50,000 troops and fields the feared and deadly heavy cavalry, a force that some say is nearly unstoppable. This army crosses the mountains and takes the city of Bordeaux by storm. It manages to win a decisive victory against Duke Odo of Aquitaine at the river Garonne. The Franks are forced to retreat, and there is little left to stop al-Ghafiqi and his army. Al-Ghafiqi now moves confidently on to take the rich city of Tours. But then suddenly his path is blocked. A last-ditch alliance of Odo of Aquitaine and the rising star, Charles Martel, have assembled their forces to oppose the armies of the Caliphate. They have taken up the high ground and won't budge. Al-Ghafiqi takes up battle position and brings his scattered forces in from across France. Once assembled, he sends his vaunted heavy cavalry into a direct charge. But surprisingly, the Franks hold their ground. However, just as the Arab horsemen are about to break through, Charles sends Odo into a daring raid deep into the enemy rear to attack their camp. When the Arabic forces see this, they break rank and race back, against the orders of their commander. Despite his best efforts to hold his men in formation, al-Ghafiqi's line falls apart. Charles Martel seizes this opportunity, going from the defense to the offense, rushing down the hill and smashing into the Arab line. The battle becomes a slaughter. Charles Martel won a decisive victory and immortal glory that day. Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi lay dead at his feet, his army smashed. The army of the Caliphate retreated from the field the next day, and eventually out of France altogether. They would never return in force ever again. Charles Martel, to be known to history as the Hammer, would go on to establish the Carolingian dynasty. His grandson Charlemagne would be part of the Christian reconquest and would go on to establish the Holy Roman Empire. To this day, historians debate the significance of this battle. Some say that it was here that Western Christendom was saved and the Islamic conquest finally stopped. Others argue that the Islamic conquest had already run out of steam and that this battle really wasn't that decisive. Either way, France was to remain a Christian state, and the Muslims would remain in Spain for another 700 years.
What happens in 700 years?
Well, in 700 years, Isabella and her brother Ferdinand, they took over Cordoba, and it was basically a conversion of all Muslims and all Jews. That's how the Ottoman Empire started to receive loads of Jewish population from Spain, because they sent their boats to Spain to pick them up and take them in Constantinople. So, and that was the end. That's what's the end of the Moor Spain. Yeah. So, right, two charts. Yep. No, not really assimilation. Yeah, to some extent it's happened. Yeah. Anyway, back to Byzantium. So Leo the Sword, he promulgated new set of laws that receives the name Ecloga. And Ecloga became an important milestone in the development of Byzantine laws, to the point that even in the major canon law code of the Russian Church, Kормчая книга, there are references from Ecloga. So the church, as it's often rejecting theological views of iconoclast, would adopt those practical things that were sensible. Another thing that I would like to mention here, that we will be dealing. Okay, so actually I will save it for later. No problem. Yeah, and right now we are seeing a son of Leo, Constantine the Fifth, whom Christians, Orthodox Christians, called dung named, right? Because reportedly he desecrated the baptismal font before he was baptized as an infant, right? And he was the one who already carried on iconoclasts, who kind of wanted to make sure that the empire would forever remain iconoclast. So in 7054, he gathered a council in Iria that was an ecumenical council according to, the way he saw it. The church doesn't recognize this as an ecumenical council. So there were like 300 of bishops, and bishops' views on icons would also roughly depend on their geographical positions. Those who were in the east, they were in favor of iconoclasm. And many who were in the capital, they were bitterly opposed iconoclasm. So there was division. And of course, monks in big numbers, they refused to obey, and very many of them found their refuge in Rome. And that contributed, that was another important stage in the development of authority of the Bishop of Rome, to the point that in the next century, the Bishop of Rome felt totally all right to interfere in the inner affairs of the Byzantine Church, making Patriarch Photius, pushing him back, pointing out that you yourself have your own theological idiosyncrasies, which was filioque, because filioque was there for a long time, but only in the 9th century they pointed out to filioque. But sort of it takes two to tango, right? And in this sense, Byzantines worked very hard to appeal to the authority of the Bishop of Rome in the time of iconoclasm. So plus things became more bitter because at that time papal patrimonies, papal land, people's land were taken by iconoclasts, right? And this became also a big bargain chip between Rome and Constantinople, because the Pope in Rome felt that he was robbed by Byzantine emperors. Okay, so part of those reforms, and those reforms under Constantine the Fifth, they had widespread implications. It was not just about forcing subjects to not to venerate icons. It was about totally incorporating monasticism into the church structure. And interestingly, traces of iconoclasm can be found in the Imperial Russia. For instance, if you think about the ecclesiastical statute, which was a guiding document adopted by Peter the Great and drafted by Archbishop Feofan Prokopovich, this document is written in polemical way as a piece of satire or satiric piece, and it was saying that you say that monks pray, but what wonder about this? There were so many monks in Byzantium that Byzantium collapsed at the end because there were so many of them. And this is very iconoclast line of thinking, because they precisely wanted to integrate monastics with their land ownership into the church and fully control them. And that was another reason why churchmen would fight back, because they felt that the state, the empire, wanted to be in charge of the church. But unlike in Russia, in Byzantium, the empire had never succeeded in this. Right? You kind of understand that from point of emperor, it's very good to be in full control of the land. It's very good to be in charge, because there were a lot of land, many monasteries, and so on. It really would be good to control it. The same dynamics is seen in the West. That's why until nowadays, the Queen of England is the head of the Anglican Church. So that's how it finally resulted elsewhere. So the same dynamic, same processes is seen in Byzantium right now. Okay. So the Church of Agia Irene, which we saw and which you saw definitely outside of this class, represents this iconoclast idea of let me just share it with you. Okay. Yeah, you kind of see what you saw in Al-Andalus, right? In Cordoba, you see similar sort of trend, right? So kind of development of more ornaments and purely graphic forms. So at the end of the century, Leo IV, Khazar, because his mom was a Khazarian, he married a noble woman from Athens, who was a secret iconophile, right?
Ocha,
Yes?
so it says that at the top of the screen, in 766, monks were forced to parade on hippodrome hand in hand with women. That was which emperor?
Yes, a Constantine the Fifth.
Oh, okay.
Right, and actually it was done by one of his generals, I think, right? So, but things like that, they only make people to fight back more. You know, it's really counterproductive.
Because that doesn't really seem like something that a pious person would do if they were just, you know, iconophiles, like, oh yeah, these are heretics, I'm going to make them sin more. Is that like
well, you see, basically it's all about dehumanizing your opponents, right? Basically, you are not, if you are a pious monk, according to them, you just go with the flow, right? So, but if you are disobeying, then you are just, you know, they would dehumanize you, sort of. Look at those people; they are disobeyed to emperor, and so on. That's I think was the line, that pious people would just, you know, do whatever is required at this day. So, right, okay, and. So we talked about the church in isolation. Now back to Saint Irene, right? Similarly to Emperor Constantine, right? So Emperor Constantine, he was a soldier emperor, right? He was quite brutal. We know that he put to death his own wife fast, and so similar things related to Emperor Irene, but she is canonized by the church because of her restoration of icons, right? Icon veneration. And she was not trusted by the army, and army wanted to ball keep rolling, that things, an army served similarly as armies in Turkey right now. So in Turkey, army is a kind of guarantee of constitution. Army is supposed to look that the state would remain secular and not going to be an Islamic state or anything. So, and it's kind of, it plays the role of checks and balances. Similarly, in Byzantium, army also kept an eye on things, and they were concerned that that son of Leo Khazar would be pushed aside. So Constantine the Six was proclaimed an emperor, but sort of from worldly point of view, he made a mistake that he didn't really get rid of his mother. Whoever nasty it sounds, right? But he was very connected to his mother and very influenced by her, probably. And he committed the first thing in Byzantine, first imperial divorce in the Byzantine history, right? That he married his sweetheart, sending away his wife, and it's produced a division in the church, because the Studite monk who became very influential, since they were champions of Orthodoxy, they were on front lines, they were confessors of the faith. Some of them were branded, like we have those saints, Feofan, who was branded because they would put various swear words on his forehead and so on. And but it's kind of more church history, so I would probably keep it under control right now. So anyway, so what we need to know is that Irene was supported by Tarasius, who also was, I believe, swiftly elevated from a secular position into patriarchal position, right? He was not sort of rank and file monk, right? He was a nobleman who was like-minded nobleman regarding icons. So
is it Empress Irene or Emperor Irene?
Empress. She called herself an emperor when because it was embarrassment for everybody else to deal with a woman. So it kind of was a very male-dominated world. So you are, or anthropos, you are a man if you are a male. You're kind of not a full human person if you are a female. So she, and this is just my English, you know. Please correct me also if you come across anything else. Yes, she's an empress indeed. So she assembled council in Nicaea, because the first attempt to have a council in Constantinople was a failure, since the army dispersed bishops kind of don't even think about doing this. It's really what you are doing. It's just against the memory of all our great emperors. So, okay, because she was not a rock figure, right? She was not a rock figure as a ruler. That's, again, that's another thing, right? So that's what I was referring to. So instead, Constantine the Six refused kind of to make her mother no candidate for emperors. Then his mother took care of her own son, and some accounts say, but that might be exaggeration, that his eyes were taken out in the same purple chamber when he was born. That's probably, I would say, you might come across this, and people like to cite this, but that might be just sort of exaggeration to just demonstrate brutality of the moment. So she became the empress, but she didn't do very well. Charlemagne didn't take her seriously, refusing to marry her. So, and then he became an emperor himself, because it was kind of embarrassment that in Byzantium there is a going on there is female sitting on the throne. It's just nonsense.
Who refused to marry who? Because in the text that you are reading off, it says refused to marry him. Like Theodora, Irene refused to marry him, but then you just said that
Charlemagne. It should be Charlemagne. Yes, she refused to marry Charlemagne. Okay. All right. Now we are dealing with very Byzantine situations, the same scenarios that you have seen a number of times, that it takes a general to stop decline to reverse things. And it was this time General Nicephorus. He himself was an Orthodox practitioner, even to the point that he would consult Studite monks. And now we're kind of dealing with two extremes. One extreme was that Byzantine iconoclast attempt to totally controlling monastics. Now monastics sort of go totally uncontrolled, to the point that they advise to Nicephorus whether or not he should campaign. It's like you have an elder and you are a president, you come to an elder and you ask, should I really sort of start this or that? An elder would advise you, right? So in my opinion, it's problematic. And here, that's what Nicephorus was doing. He advised Studite monks whether he should enter into the war with Bulgarians to put them under control, right? And the campaign started against Bulgarians. And at the end, that's what Michael the Syrian, he's a chronicle who was non-Chalcedonite. He wasn't part of the Orthodox Church himself, so he might have some prejudice. But nevertheless, I don't think this account is really challenged. I think it's conventionally accepted what Nicephorus done in Bulgaria. And here is a quote from Michael. You can read for yourself, right? I don't need. But I just would like to see. There were nice. Let me find something for you.
It says that Nicephorus, like, he was killed by the Bulgarians, but he had to pay tributes. Oh, okay, that's to the Arabs. Okay.
And what also this signify, it's now ongoing sort of empire was still to deal with the Arabs. Now empire have similar concerns with Bulgarians, right? So to fight back and put them under control. Okay. Let's see.
You can't see the video.
I know.
Πώς μπορώ να σας δείξω την ευγνωμοσύνη μου? Είναι όλα εντάξει, φρουρέ. نعم من يعود قد تكون هذه المرة مختلفة.
Что еще за плохие новости?
Okay, so right. Okay, that's basically takes care of what we're supposed to talk today. I think brings us to the natural end of this class. Okay. So yes, Artyom, I'm waiting to hear from you what we discussed, right? Send me that email, please. Okay.